Hey everybody, my name is Matt Carmichael. I'm editor of What the Future, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar about the future of food. This will be our last What the Future webinar for 2024, so let's make it count and dive in. This is the fifth food-related issue of WTF, starting with the food issue we did in early 2018. The conceit of WTF was initially to get people thinking about the future. So we'd ask them for a question that they'd wish they'd had a trend line on in 5 or 10 years. And being researchers, we could then start fielding those questions today. That led to some really ahead of their time conversations, like when we talked to the then president, now CEO of McDonald's, Chris Kempczynski. And he was thinking about ghost kitchens so far before they became a thing that we needed all of that lead-in question just to explain what we were even asking about. It also meant that we could see some problems coming. So we hate to say we told you so. Nah, who are we kidding? It's fun to say we told you so. In that 2018 issue, we talked about alternative proteins and foods using gene-modifying technologies like CRISPR from many perspectives, one of which was political. What happened, we wondered, if these issues became polarized? At the time, we talked to Jessica Almy, the political director for Good Food Institute, an industry organization representing producers of new meat and meat alternatives. She said, "We've got at least bipartisan support in the US Congress, but in the data we could see some differences by party ID. And sure, that could be correlates for age or urbanicity, but anything that can be political often will become political." Now, Florida and Alabama have banned cultivated meats. Other states have pledged to join the list. Florida is fighting back against the global elite's plan to force the world to eat meat grown in a petri dish or bugs to achieve their authoritarian goals, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said in a press release at the time. Bugs for authoritarianism. See, many forces will drive the future. Things that seem like they're sure things sometimes aren't, and it's good to use caution. The hottest story of food for the near term seems to come from entirely outside the food industry, from the world of pharmaceuticals. GLP-1 medications have the potential to disrupt the world of food. But when managing editor Kate MacArthur asked, what if GLP medications aren't a game changer? We of course had to pause and consider this very real plausibility. The thing about GLP-1s isn't necessarily that they will or won't cause dramatic shifts in how America eats and craves. The disruption is that this suite of medications has opened a whole new set of potential futures. We weren't having serious conversations about what if Americans thought about obesity differently, or what if we could prevent obesity entirely before these came on the market. And now those are serious futures to prepare for. Like generative AI transformers, aka GPTs, the other G in what we'll call the G-Whiz economy, GLP-1's potential could be over or underhyped. Food is political in many ways. Processed foods have become a bit of a bugaboo in the 2024 elections. A pet issue of Health and Human Services Secretary nominee Robert Kennedy Jr. was reducing how much processed foods Americans eat. Older Americans are already trying to limit the processed foods they eat, far outpacing younger generations. Gen Zers and millennials are an interesting story as being generally health conscious in a holistic, mental, physical, well-being kind of way. They're generalized as foodies, but also still suffer from the same invincibility of youth. And RFK is a bit of a wild card. He's also talking about possibly shifting fast food chains back to frying and tallow. Lots of things are on the table that weren't before. He's not very keen on big pharma or solutions like GLP-1s. So again, what if that fizzles out as a solution? How will this administration tackle the intersection of food, policy, and politics and climate change? Americans' consumptions of meat is taking its toll on the planet. And that could shift the political discussion too, as we need to feed a growing population literally every day, but also see the growing impacts of climate change on our daily lives. Today and in the near term, so much of the popular discussion of food is centered around prices. While interest rates may have dropped recently and inflation has slowed, prices are still high for our groceries. People feel they're paying more now, and they think that will get worse in the future. But the food industry has faced challenges before. It's continuously having to respond to the latest fad or tastes or diets, or ingredients or packaging regulation. Innovation is the norm. And that, in many ways, is accelerating due to social media. Years ago, I interviewed the fishmonger at New York's Grand Central Terminal. He would check the Wednesday New York Times recipe section for fish recipes. If there was, say, a salmon recipe, he knew he needed to stock up for the weekend rush. But today, a food influencer can overwhelm a restaurant with customers within hours of a positive review. As I said, there are many factors at play from many spheres. What if GLP-1s are used by a large sector of the population and it changes their relationship to food and cravables like coffee or alcohol? Or not? What if we really can feed our children better and more affordably and teach them lifelong nutrition habits? What if private label food brands lead on quality and taste? What will climate change do to our food supply and the consistency of the supply chain? Grab a snack, maybe even a cocktail, and enjoy what we've cooked up for you. Sorry, I made it almost to the end with no food puns, but it's just so hard not to dish them up. Today we'll talk about a number of different tools that we use when we think about the future. And the first is we start to think about the shifts. So we think about customized diet, about how personalized nutrition could dramatically shift what we eat, when, and why. Utilizing factors like genetics, metabolism, lifestyle, and food preferences, each of us could better understand how our bodies react to food and use this knowledge to optimize our health and meet our goals. We think about politicizing food, how in increasingly polarized societies, food is not immune to political debate, as we've been talking about. Farming practices, land use, ethical consumption, and subsidies and incentives are just a few of the political debates making waves. In addition, with an increasingly connected global society and greater migration, food and culture are inexorably linked and being shared more widely across borders. And we think about sustainable soil, how regenerative agriculture is a promising approach to food production that focuses on restoring soil health and biodiversity. By prioritizing practices like cover cropping and reducing tillage, regenerative agriculture aims to enhance soil fertility, sequester carbon, and improve water retention. This shift towards regenerative methods has the potential to create a more resilient and sustainable food system, benefiting both the environment and consumer health. It will also serve as an interesting case study for how other industries might need to adapt business models for a more regenerative versus extractive economy. As with any What the Future, we talked to a great group of people, bringing in all sorts of expert opinions from all different corners of the food universe. Starting with Kate McKenzie, the Executive Director of New York City's Mayor's Office of Food Policy, which oversees the food policy for the New York public school system. We spoke to Florian Schattenman, the Chief Technology Officer at Cargill, Aaron Lash, Director of Consumer Equity Research of Morningstar Research, Amit Phillip, Chief Strategy and Growth Officer of Treehouse Foods, and Efren Rosario, the Global Head of Features and Shopper Planning of Diageo. The New York City public school system is the second largest institutional food buyer in the nation. It serves breakfast and lunch daily to 1 million kids in 1,600 public schools. The New York City Mayor's Office of Food Policy, directed by Kate McKenzie, sets the policy for schools and for restaurants in the city. When she thinks about the future, she's thinking about how policy and education can nudge us to a healthier and more sustainable future, as long as the solutions can scale. The state of Texas has an outsized influence on the textbook industry because it buys so many. New York City can do that with food. If they need something that doesn't exist yet, like a different portion size or a lower sugar version, they can will it into existence with the help of their food service partners. They also make a lot of the food themselves. That takes a lot of ingredients. Putting together a consistent supply chain of trusted partners is important, takes work, and benefits both sides. Here's what she told me.
We are the country's second largest buyer of food. In 2008, the city introduced nutrition standards for the food it served. And so those were often things like fat and protein and sodium in particular, and fiber, and things that could be manufactured differently to be able to produce the nutrient profile of what we wanted. So we've had a long relationship with food manufacturers who certainly want the business of the city of New York, and who, quite frankly, if a product didn't exist, it would be created for the city of New York. Some classic examples there were around a pizza. It didn't exist in the marketplace. These are all very intricate relationships and back and forths with food manufacturers to be able to create something that the city of New York will buy. We have that relationship with manufacturers to be able to say, here's the product we want. How do we work with you to be able to create something like that? And then, of course, the ripple effects of this are that other school districts and other municipalities will be able to benefit from that too. As the saying goes, in many cases, what New York does, others follow.
As Americans spend $3.9 billion for food they eat outside of home, including at schools, the workplaces, and restaurants, food manufacturers need to sell the benefits of their products not just to consumers, but also to the establishments that feed them. Knowing the needs of each category of buyer is critical to making sales. And what consumers want and what institutions require are not always the same, says Ann Hunter, an SVP and head of Ipsos's B2B products. Consumers, especially parents, often say they're looking for healthy, flavorful meals at an affordable cost. And the entities that feed them away from home must keep this top of mind when purchasing ingredients to delight their customers. But additional factors, such as ease of preparation, are less important to professional chefs and food service buyers than they are to grocery shoppers. To maximize sales in every environment, food manufacturers need to separate research with consumers, B2C, and professional buyers like chefs, for instance, with distinctive messaging and research approaches. As the population rises and middle class grows with it, so will demand for protein. But increasing production can strain the environment, the supply chain, and food security, which is driving interest in plant-based and alternative protein sources. Florian Schattenman is the Chief Technology Officer for Cargill, one of the leading global players in the production of protein. When he thinks what the future, he believes having multiple approaches to meet our protein needs is the best way to avoid getting caught in the hype cycle. Cargill wants to be the leading protein supplier. That, he says, requires having a broad portfolio. That's true of products and of partners. Here's what he told Kate.
There's multiple approaches. We are big enough of a company that we can do multiple things at the same time. And also, it's a very dynamic area. If you pick a supposed potential winner too early, you may be on the wrong track and get caught entirely in nowhere land, right? If you're a startup and this is your one idea, what are you going to do? You're going to have to drive this until the potentially bitter end. But in our case, we can really play that broader. Not everything has to be invented in the house of Cargill. We can do venture investments, we can do internal R&D and so on. So we're looking at it from that way because you got to be a little bit hedged in a dynamic world. And I think that's probably a good approach for looking into the future in general. Don't pick your winner too early because you might get caught in a hype curve. One thing we see is how we innovate is changing. We see a lot more collaboration between the food manufacturer, a scaler like us, and maybe a technology provider, but you also see more and more early collaboration now with appliance makers, right? No one player that can do it all.
Social media platforms and online forums are treasure troves of insights into how American diets and habits are evolving, from aptogenetic beverages to functional mushrooms. Generative AI tools can enable brands to effectively translate this vast pool of information into actionable insights, says Joe Lonick, a senior director with Ipsos and Cesio. While many consumer global brands use social media to engage shoppers through influencers and sponsored content, too few are truly listening to what the consumers are organically sharing about their product experiences. Generative AI tools like Ipsos's Signal Gen AI can streamline that process, uncovering unmet needs and pain points across the food and beverage landscape and beyond. So insights and innovation teams can track fast-moving conversations, identify new trends, and determine what to explore and when to pivot. Erin Lash studies GLP-1s from the perspective of a food industry analyst. She sees potential for these treatments to be a game changer, but also for them to behave like many historical diet and health trends that have ebbed and flowed. As the Director of Consumer and Equity Research at Morningstar Research, she sees a need for investment as well as patience. And she points out that even if these products are used by someone in a household, they might not be used by everyone. She's keeping perspective based on the past as well as the potential for the future. But she's mindful that when she's thinking about the future, we all have to eat. Here's what she told me.
We are the country.
If you take a step back, packaged food companies in particular have faced challenges from a host of evolving diet trends and health fads over the years that they've had to contend with. And their challenge has been more impacted as well by the fact that consumers say they want products that are healthier for them, but the purchase patterns don't necessarily support that contention. And so what packaged food companies have been doing is making their products healthier, taking out salts, taking out artificial flavors and colors, etc., over years, but not telling consumers about it because consumers attribute a healthier product to one with a less favorable taste. But I do think that because of the potential for overall impact, the onus remains on packaged food companies to make sure that they're investing with significant foresight in terms of what these consumers are after. And that's no different than keeping up with evolving consumer trends more broadly. Odds are that because of capacity constraints, in speaking with our healthcare analysts, that this could take years for that to really manifest. And so it does give packaged food companies the runway to really experiment and explore and innovate around these opportunities and options so that they're prepared to ensure that what they're bringing to market is aligned with what consumers are after.
GLP-1s and related weight loss drugs are changing many Americans' relationships with food and health. But that impact is multifaceted and highly variable, meaning brands need observational, human-centric research to understand the stakes for their business, says Alexandra Stiver, a director with Ipsos Ethnography Center of Excellence. It's one thing to view the GLP-1s in aggregate, but it's increasingly clear that these treatments can have unique and highly personal effects from what and how they eat to how they spend. Face-to-face ethnographic research offers a window into the real-world context in which GLP-1 medications are used. This can help brands understand the challenges that people living with obesity and related diseases like diabetes face and stay in touch as consumers' wants and needs evolve. Private label food brands have shed their knockoff image, with record sales in 2023 and momentum to continue in 2024. Chains like Trader Joe's and Costco have helped to transform store-owned brands into differentiators in a competitive retail landscape. But could they also help make foods healthier? Asks Amit Philip, the Chief Strategy and Growth Officer at private label manufacturer Treehouse Foods. He sees consumers' interest in getting healthier as a major opportunity for food brands to compete on another level. He told Kate that the private label space and consumer expectation has evolved from knockoffs to unique brand experiences. But one thing he needs consideration is key, and it's especially key given the current nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., who's pledged, with President Trump's backing, to, quote, make America healthy again. Here's what he told Kate.
The biggest question for me, and this is not about private label, it is just about food consumption, is America going to get healthier? Back in 2010, 2012, there was a lot of hype about, wow, America's getting healthier. And there was the same thing back in 1972 as well. And all you've seen is obesity and things like that grow in America. And so now there's a lot of hype again, more driven by GLP-1 drugs. When we compare to our peers in Europe, and they have very different diets and associated with that, less diseases and things like that as well. I think there, like with anything, there'll be a portion of the population that is really into it. But I think it's speaking to this bigger question of people are looking to get healthier, and so they're looking for ways that will happen. GLP-1 happens to be the current way that people are experimenting, but we can find healthy, great tasting food. I think in the long term, that will probably win out over having to inject yourself with something.
As trend cycles accelerate and competition intensifies, brands across industries are challenged to innovate faster than ever. But product misfires are costly, and rushing to market without early-stage research only hurts their odds, says Alison Heffernan, an SVP in Ipsos's innovation practice. To avoid wasting significant resources on late-stage development, brands must look before they leap. The answer is incorporating data-backed insights and human perspectives, the left brain and right brain sides of innovation, early in the development process. Ipsos has perfected a live event approach with its Ipsos Labs to make that a reality, where researchers and all the key stakeholders can now conduct qualitative and quantitative research with real consumers in a single day. That helps ensure that their next product will be a hit even before it hits the market. What we eat and drink isn't the only thing changing. The way people socialize is undergoing a seismic shift with profound implications for consumers, bars, and restaurants. Global spirits giant Diageo recently embarked on an ambitious foresight initiative to understand the key macro forces and trends shaping the future of how we'll celebrate life's big moments, small and big, away from home. To that effort, the owner of Johnnie Walker, Guinness, and Smirnoff brands identified 3 futures it sees as possible and probable in the US as a roadmap for industry players. Kate spoke with the global head of futures and shopper planning for Diageo, Efren Rosario. Efren is looking at trends related to hybridization of work, which is an option for nearly half of workers according to the Ipsos Consumer Tracker. That's shifted the occasions people have for socializing, both with friends and with coworkers. But trends around wellness are playing into the shifts as well. Here's what he told Kate.
By nature of us having been stuck at home during the pandemic, it's actually made us more eager to socialize with.
As it relates to what they're drinking, we would be remiss if we didn't dive into what they're not drinking as much. Alcohol. Ipsos data affirms the perception that the Americans are consuming less alcohol, says Sam Agarwal, a VP in Ipsos Market Strategy and Understanding Practice. Data also reveals that this shift isn't limited to sober individuals. More than a third of people of legal drinking age who do drink alcohol regularly say they've recently tried non-alcoholic beverages. Zero-proof beverages and mocktails certainly remain a niche market, but it's clear that interest is growing and isn't limited to teetotalers or dry January. That means brands and businesses need a deeper understanding of the reasons Americans are embracing this change in the first place. Health is often cited as a concern, but those concerns can encompass a range of direct motivations, not to mention new socialization patterns and changes in drinking time and occasions. The stakes may be obvious for food and beverage manufacturers and bars, but these shifts are likely to also affect restaurants, grocers, and entertainment venues. And now, a couple more of our future tools. One is the tensions, and the future is always in tension. We can measure those contradictions today with forced choice questions, and we plot them against each other in a classic 2x2 grid. That allows us to visualize where we are today, but also imagine the possible futures if those tensions shift over time, and how far they'd have to go to get us to a different future from our baseline. So here's where we are today in terms of thinking about whether we stick to our budget or we consider the environment. Today, there's so much hedonism and so little time. We buy whatever we want when we want it, without regard for the consequences. Many things we eat, like meat and almonds, aren't great for the environment, but a recurring theme in What the Future is that climate change might force our attitudes to change. Given how close we are to the price sensitivity axis, government could use taxes and regulations as a policy lever to advance sustainability. But it wouldn't be hard to see us shifting to the bottom right, and in this world, food prices, or perhaps unrelated economic pressures, lead us to budget tightly on our grocery trips. Clearly, there are plausible implications for health of both our planet and ourselves. Tension 2, buying convenience foods or eat and drink out. If our baseline continues, we will see a future where we prioritize convenience over sustainability and tend to socialize over food and drink. Innovation will continue to focus on taking the work out of food. Socializing will keep the kitchen the heart of the home, and reservation phone apps and tasty appetizers must-haves. But sustainability isn't far over the axis, so leaning into those concerns would be good for brands too. And here a slight shift could bring us into the top left, and in this world, people prize convenience because they want to maximize social time that somehow doesn't involve food or beverages. Is this world possible in a GLP-1 altered future? And the last tool we're going to look at is the future jobs to be done, an Ipsos spin on the traditional jobs to be done framework. To bring these jobs into the future, we envision powerful and plausible scenarios through strategic foresight. These scenarios help us define the circumstances in which people may find themselves, like considering whether to make food purchases based on a product's environmental impact versus whether the item is within their weekly food budget. While it's typical in foresight to create clusters of future jobs to be done, we're sharing one scenario here as an example. So, in a world where people can currently navigate economic uncertainty, environmental instability, and time deficiencies, they'll regularly encounter an expansive set of challenges. For example, in a world where grocery prices climb, consumers may be forced to abandon more nutritious options in favor of cheaper, less sustainably produced and packaged choices. So our potential future jobs to be done include helping me make choices that balance my nutrition and budget goals, make it easy for me to understand how food choices affect my health, my community, and the planet, and help me create low-effort social moments centered around meal times. And with that, we're done. Our next issue of What the Future, our final one for the year, has already dropped. And since this is our last webinar together, I want to thank you so much for joining. And on behalf of the amazing team that brings you What the Future each month, I want to say a great thank you. Our next issue to start next year is going to be about persuasion and the ways we persuade and the people who do the persuading. And we do all of this because when you give yourself a little time, like joining a webinar over lunch, for instance, or reading an issue of What the Future, or anything that allows you to get out of the quarterly earnings call mindset and how you're going to meet the monthly goal. When you start to think about the future and you imagine what the world is going to look like in 3 or 5 or 10 years, and you can start to think about what your consumers are going to be living through and what sort of needs they're going to have, then you can start to imagine the products you need to start innovating now and the messaging you'll have to do then to get these products in front of people. In other words, when you imagine possible tomorrows, you ask better questions today. What the Future is a monthly publication of Ipsos. It is free. There is a weekly newsletter. You can subscribe with the QR code on your screen, and we'll drop you one email a month with the new issue as it comes out. We've got a great slate already starting planning for 2025, and we can't wait to see you. So thank you again for coming out. Again, my name is Matt Carmichael. I'm WTF's editor, and I'll see you in the future.